Can you tell us a little bit more about the humanitarian pause, what that would look like, what it means, how long it would be, how it would work?
Sure. I think we've talked about this before, Colleen. I mean, we're really not just talking about like one pause. What we're trying to do is explore the idea of as many pauses as might be necessary to continue to get aid out and to continue to work to get people out safely, including hostages. The president already worked on one such pause when we were able to get those 2 Americans out, and that's what we're kind of looking at. And just to remind, when we're talking about humanitarian pause, what we're talking about are temporary, localized pauses in the fighting to meet a certain goal or goals. As I said, get aid in, get people out.
And is that something that can happen immediately? I mean, where is the Israeli Prime Minister on this? Is he willing to continue to do this, especially if it's more than one pause?
Well, we were able to work with him to help get Americans out before, and so we're certainly hoping that kind of cooperation will continue. But each instance of it, each effort to get a pause is going to be unique in its own way, and it's going to require negotiation and diplomacy. And the president, you heard him talk about this yesterday, is 100% committed to doing what it takes to pursue that kind of diplomacy.
And as you push the Israelis for humanitarian pauses, are they just supposed to sit back and let Hamas attack them and attack them and attack them and not fight back?
We have been crystal clear that Israel has the right to defend themselves. I mean, my goodness.
Pause means they can still shoot back.
My goodness, Peter, we're giving them security assistance almost every day. But do we advocate pauses by both sides here, temporary, localized, to be able to get Americans out, to be able to get aid in? You betcha we do. That doesn't mean that we're calling for a general ceasefire. Hang on a second. There's a difference. There's a big difference here.
This might be repeating something, but I just want to be fully clear that, so when the president said last night that he convinced Prime Minister Netanyahu to do a ceasefire, he was referring to the 2 Americans that got out. But Israel has never acknowledged that they paused. So can you give us a better understanding of what exactly was paused, and if the understanding is that for every sort of hostage release there would be a pause?
I'm not going to go into more detail than what we've already put out there publicly. We were able to help negotiate the release of those 2 Americans, and that's a good thing. And in order to be able to get folks out, you got to make sure they can do it safely.
Thanks a lot, Kareem. John, over the past 3 weeks, you've expressed from the podium your opposition to a ceasefire. Now you're advocating for a humanitarian pauses. That's the way you described it. What's the difference between the two, and is it a two-way street? Is a humanitarian pause one in which there would be essentially no fighting from the Hamas side at the same time that there's no fighting from the Israeli side?
So a couple of things here. First, you said now we're advocating. This is something we've been talking about now for several days. In fact, Secretary Blinken brought it up at the UN, believe late last week. I mean, this is not some new idea that we're just introducing into the intellectual pool here today. And I'll repeat it again. When we talk about a general ceasefire, we're talking about a stoppage of fighting all across the front, if you will, all across the battle space, where neither side, everybody lays down their arms, and it's a general ceasefire. Usually, when you're talking about a general ceasefire, it is about trying to find a cessation to the hostilities, to try to get to a truce, right, or to some sort of end of the war. That's what we mean by a general ceasefire. And we aren't advocating for a general ceasefire at this point. As I said earlier, we believe that a general ceasefire would benefit Hamas in providing them breathing space and time to continue to plot and execute attacks on the Israeli people. A humanitarian pause, when we talk about that, it is temporary, localized, and focused on a particular objective or objectives. Humanitarian aid in, people out. And in a pause, again, each one would have to be negotiated separately and distinctly, but the general idea is that in that geographic space, for that limited time, there would be a cessation of hostilities enough to allow whatever it is you're trying to allow. Does that make sense? Does that lay it out?
It does. You've spent most of your professional life in the military. I don't know the answer to this question. Was there a time in the U.S. fight against al-Qaeda in which the U.S. implemented humanitarian pauses?
I'm not aware of any, but I would remind you that al-Qaeda, wasn't in possession of 200 hostages in Iraq or Afghanistan, and it's a different situation.